Women, the Vote, and the Civil War. The story of women putting their fight for the right to vote on hold during the Civil War to help out in the war effort and fight for a cause greater than their own, emancipation. Often overlooked in the mainstream history lessons, women were equally important as the men during the fight for keeping the Union together and fighting for the rights for all to be free. Women became more involved during the Civil War in efforts of helping soldiers by taking over men's work, nursing the wounded, being spies, and even fighting as soldiers. They also formed organizations and events to help troops such as the Sanitary Commission, Sanitary Fairs, Great Central Fairs, and Women's Loyal National League. It was during the Civil War that women changed their role and identity forever. The Universal Suffrage Association started when women activists stopped campaigning for the vote by refusing to support the 15th Amendment during Civil War, because the 14th and the 15th only applied to men and not women.
The United States Sanitary Commission, or the USSC, was founded in the summer of June 18, 1861. The commission was founded by private citizens who were mainly women. The Sanitary Commission was unique to the Union Army because the Confederacy did not have one. This contributed greatly to the North's victory over the South because the commission provided medical help and supplies for the Northern Army. Women ran and contributed greatly to this commission mainly by being nurses and raising funds. They cared for wounded soldiers by helping to prevent infections that killed a great number of soldiers. At this time, infections were very common, and they were the main reason these men were dying. Women taught men about hygiene and how to prevent the spread of diseases and infections. Many infections came from amputations. Amputation was a wounded soldier's best chance of survival. Out of 174,000 extremity wounds, 30,000 resulted in amputations. Many of these amputations were done without cleaning the tools after use. When nurses came into the medical field, they implemented cleaner hospitals. They prevented infections by keeping the hospitals clean. They also contributed by being cooks. Many soldiers did not have edible food. Fresh fruit and vegetables were rare. When they received meat, it was either spoiled or too full of preservatives, making it unedible. Women changed this by cooking fresh, edible meals at camps. They also collected supplies and made clothing to help the men through the harsh winter. The Sanitary Commission also held sanitary fairs. These events were planned to raise funds for the Union Army. The supplies went to helping the soldiers and their families. All of this was volunteer work and no one was being paid. Overall, these sanitary fairs collected about $15 million in funds for the Union Army. The Great Central Fair was one of the largest sanitary fairs ever held. It was planned 6 months before, inspired by previous fairs. The festival raised over $1 million in funds. Abraham Lincoln contributed to this by selling 48 signed copies of his Emancipation Proclamation. They sold for $10 apiece. This fair was the largest sanitary fair ever recorded in history. Thanks to the women who created and ran this commission, the North was able to overcome the South. This was a great contribution to the Union's victory because these women cared for and fed the men. They also provided supplies that helped them survive and win. Although they might not have been the main reason the Union Army won, they were a big factor in the victory. Without these great women and their contribution, the outcome of the war may have been different. This also changed the way everyone looked at women at this time. It also showed how important these women were because they contributed with skills many men did not have.
The Women's Loyal National League was formed May 14, 1863 by its eventual president Elizabeth Cady Stanton and secretary Susan B. Anthony to campaign for an amendment to the Constitution that would abolish slavery. The League collected almost 400,000 signatures on a petition to abolish slavery and present them to Congress, the largest petition drive in U.S. history at the time. The petition drive was successful in what it sought out to do and significantly assisted the passage of the 13th Amendment. Although the League had disbanded before the amendment was ratified, it was clear that it would be approved. The League was the first national women's political organization in the United States. Both Anthony and Stanton had experience with abolitionist work, as Anthony worked as a paid representative of the American Anti-Slavery Society, and Stanton's husband had also worked for the same organization. The two women laid the groundwork for the new organization by publishing an appeal to the women of the Republic in the New York Times, which was an influential newspaper opposed to slavery. The article called women to attend the convention, and many well-known figures in the women's movement such as Lucy Stone, Amy Post, Mara C. Wright, Antoinette B. Blackwell, Ernestine Rose, and Angelina Grimke Weld joined the League. Collectively, their voice rung out across the United States. Anthony was known for starting all of her meetings with short speeches. One of her more well-known speeches read, "There is a great fear expressed on all sides lest this shall be made a war for the Negro. I am willing that it shall be. It is a war which was begun to found an empire upon slavery, and shame on us if we do not make it one to establish the freedom of the Negro. Instead of suppressing the real cause of the war, it should have been proclaimed not only by the people, but by the President, Congress, Cabinet, and every military commander." One of the resolutions she tried to introduce read, "There can never be true peace in this republic until the civil and political rights of all citizens of African descent and all women are practically established." However, many at the League opposed the resolution because it reintroduced women's rights, which they thought not relevant to the goals of the organization. The Women's Loyal National League had approximately 5,000 members at its highest point. The petition drive the League launched calling for an amendment abolishing slavery collected nearly 400,000 signatures, or 1 out of every 24 adults in the northern states. Senator Charles Sumner, the League's closest ally in Congress, presented the first 100,000 petitions to Congress by having black men carry the petitions, which had been glued end to end in a large roll onto the Senate floor. The petition drive was funded partly from donations from the petition signers themselves and partly from other donors. The League also raised money by selling pins with the words, "In emancipation is national unity."
Sarah Emma Edmonds served in a war disguised as a man to be able to fight during Civil War. Enlisted as Franklin Thompson. Also successful as a Union spy, disguised as African American or woman. Became a male nurse in the 2nd Volunteers of the United States Army. Career ended when she contracted malaria. Decided to serve as a female nurse at Washington, D.C. Hospital for Wounded Soldiers ran by United States Christian Commission once she recovered. Mary Livermore joined the Sanitary Commission in Chicago to raise funds, provide aid to soldiers, and gather medical supplies. Elected president of the Sanitary Commission when the Civil War began. Supported by voting against prostitution, drinking, and fighting poverty. Became more active with the American Women's Suffrage Association when she began her Women's Right newspaper.
Clara Barton was a relief organizer and humanitarian. She was the youngest of 6 children. As a young girl, she took care of her oldest brother who fell ill. She began her practice then. At age 15, she became a teacher and opened up her own school, which she made free in Bordentown, New Jersey in 1853. She taught for 7 years. In 1861, Barton began her duties to help the soldiers in the field, where she earned her nickname Angel in the Battlefield. Barton was known as a very gracious and attentive woman. She was mostly welcome at the Battle of Antietam. Barton would aid to the soldiers as best she could, by helping them write letters, keeping their spirits up, and praying with them, and even just listening to their own personal thoughts. In 1869, Barton traveled to Geneva, Switzerland, where she served as the organization's first president until 1904. She then retired. Clara Barton died in 1912 at the age of 92. Susan B. Anthony was brought up in a Quaker household family. Although she was raised in a very religious family, she made her own decisions and was not afraid to voice her own opinion when it came to slavery and women's rights. Anthony fought for abolishing slavery and for the 14th and 15th Amendment for women. Along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they founded the American Equal Rights Association in 1866. After teaching for 15 years, she became active in temperance. Even after being humiliated, she still pushed and dedicated her life towards what she believed in. In the 1890s, Anthony raised $50,000 worth in pledges to ensure the admittance of women to the University of Rochester. In 1900, she succeeded, and women were admitted for the first time in 1900. Lucretia Mott was a women's rights activist, abolitionist, and religious reformer. Along with William Lloyd Garrison, she joined the American Anti-Slavery Society to oppose slavery. Marrying her husband, James Mott, he had always been her biggest supporter. Knowing the way society thought of women, he stood by her no matter what and stood by her every step of the way. After befriending Elizabeth Cady Stanton and calling the famous Seneca Falls Convention in New York, she was then really dedicated to women's rights. While keeping up with her commitment to women's rights, she still stood her ground for the African Americans to help them achieve their rights and goals. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a prominent 19th century suffragist and civil rights activist who was a very intelligent woman of her time. Although she was not a well-educated woman and didn't go to college, she was very aware of her surroundings. Stanton also came from a very religious family. Stanton was always involved with social activities. From there, she fell in love and met her husband, Henry B. Stanton, who was also an abolitionist. For their honeymoon, they ended up traveling to London to attend the World's Anti-Slavery Convention. Stanton there befriended Lucretia Mott. Stanton believed very strong about women's rights as well as abolishing slavery. She even believed in women getting divorced even if they were not happy in their marriage. She didn't believe they needed to stay. In the late 1860s is where she began to advocate what she called the right to self-sovereignty. Later on, Stanton then wrote Women's Bible. Although embittered, she continued her independent course on behalf of women's emancipation until her death in 1902.